All right, Keith, to start with, going to be talking about Everton. Now, there's been some suggestions that the Friedkin Group could be taking over the club within about 4 to 6 weeks, potentially. Is that a realistic timeline, please? Can you give us an update on how that is going, potentially?
Well, it's gone very quiet, but that's to be expected while the due diligence phase is being done. I think 4 weeks would be a bit on the optimistic side. I think 6 weeks is probably what I would expect for a very speedy resolution of the owners and directors test with the Premier League. I really don't see any hurdles with Dan Friedkin in this situation. There's an open information about his own source of funding. He's obviously got a good track record already with Roma and been approved with Serie A. So I think that should be pretty speedy. And I think 6 weeks would be one of the shortest times, I think, to get that approved. So I think we're looking at least 6 weeks for that. The rest of the process, the due diligence is going to be interesting. I mean, he's already apparently paid off the MSP loan of about 160 million. So actions are speaking louder than words right now, which is always a good sign. The interesting part will be on the 777 loan that's still outstanding and how that will be handled in due diligence and what's to be expected about that. But I think they'll be able to overcome all the issues. I think they've already obviously done a fair bit of work ahead of this, but still due diligence now and actually into the books and in the data room will be a different thing. He'll do it very thoroughly, I'm sure of that. And I still expect hopefully 6 weeks. So I think we're looking towards the start of the season before things can happen. However, that doesn't mean he can't still have influence over the club. In most of these situations, any player moves in or out have to be approved by the new potential owner, and he may have says as well in that. There are ways for him to funnel money into the club right now in loans, etc., before he's officially the owner. So lots of things can happen positively before that 6 weeks goes. So all at the moment, I think, is pointing towards a very great era for Everton coming up. And I'm very excited, as a lot of Evertonians are.
Picking up on that, Keith, if we sort of dive into that a bit more, what is the likely plan, do you think, that the Friedkin Group have to pay back those £200 million loans for 777 partners? And is that a critical thing to do within sort of the first weeks of them taking over potentially?
Well, as I understand it, ACAP, who is the parent company, so to speak, of 777, or at least their major funding source, would be quite happy to keep the 200 million on the balance sheet for themselves right now as an asset with Everton. And I think they'd want to do that because I think that 200 million may well appreciate if Friedkin does his job right. So they probably want to try and keep that going, whereas he may wish to pay that off. Now, that'll be a discussion between the two of them as to how that happens or when it happens. So, that's the one thing that has to be resolved between them. I think rights and media funding would accept a payoff as well. And so I think he'll end up pretty much with a club with a debt under his control to be restructured as he sees appropriate, and 94.1% ownership of the club.
There have been some suggestions, Keith. I mean, picking up what you said about, looking for next season, that's probably when the takeover will be completed. There were some suggestions over the weekend the club has complied with spending rules for the first time in a number of years following the sales of Ben Godfrey and Lewis Dobbin. What are your thoughts on that? And was that quite a big relief for Evertonians now going into the summer transfer window?
Well, that's the speculation that I saw as well over the weekend, although I'm not entirely convinced that we're really right into that safe area yet. I think we're probably still on the borderline, and hopefully it's not down to an interpretation of some of the costs that we've got in there. So I really want to have a little bit more clarity before I ease off on that fear. But certainly we know we've got this interest rate hearing coming up. Still don't understand why that couldn't have been resolved last year, but still here we are with the Premier League again with another issue, and it's just where we are just now. I think we're going to be okay. And as I say, Friedkin, in theory, can loan the club more money and other potential purchases could be made. But this next season coming up won't see any major developments in revenue, as far as I see, unless there's a naming rights deal struck for the new stadium and payment part of it is made this year. So we'd still be in a risk of breaching PSR for this next season if we were to go out and splurge without new revenues. So that's the situation just now. Is we're going to have to wait and see. But I tend to hope that we're very close to being PSR compliant.
And what does that then mean, Keith, in terms of sales potentially this summer? Are we still expecting some big names to potentially leave Goodison Park and the likes of, say, Amadou Onana to go potentially?
Well, there's been a lot of comment, as you may have seen, about the having 2 transfer windows now, about June 30th being one for clubs that are flirting with PSR situations, and then the other clubs that aren't. So now we're past that point. Then we're going to have to see if there are any decent bids come in. But I think Everton's now in a position of strength to be able to refuse any ridiculous offers, such as the one we had from Manchester United and Jared Branthwaite, which I think in general, the football community thought, well, this is just ridiculous. And it was. And it didn't do Man United and Jim Ratcliffe any favours in the way that he started off to try and deal with other clubs. And he'll learn that as it goes on, you can't do that sort of stuff. But we'll see in July. I think Onana will still be going. I think there is still life in CalvertLewin moving on as well. But I'm hoping that the Branthwaite situation will be resolved. And with the new additions we've got as well, I'm hoping that the Ndiaye deal will be announced any day now. And look, I'm hopeful for a strengthened, refreshed squad and excited.
And to sort of wrap up on that, Keith, you mentioned Dominic CalvertLewin in there. What sort of valuation will the club, have on him? And how much do you think the club would be willing to accept potentially, given that he is currently the main number 9 for Everton?
Well, it's complicated by, of course, his contract length. He's only got 1 year left on the contract. And although he's been offered a new contract, as I understand it, by the club, he hasn't signed it yet. So one of those 2 things must happen. If he doesn't sign the contract, then I think he will be sold. And I think we'll be looking at somewhere around about 30 to 35 million. With 1 year left on his contract, I think that would be a fair price. I think he can be potentially a great number 9 elsewhere. And I hope he stays at Everton. But I think he will do any club that gets him a great turn. I think he's a very talented player. And if he stays injury-free, he could really be England's next great number 9.
You've just watched a segment from Football Insider's brand new podcast, The Inside Track, with me, Lewis Pearce, alongside the guests on the show. Thanks very much for tuning in. Please do give the video a like, comment your thoughts on the topic, and feel free to share on your social media pages. If you want to listen to the full podcast episode, click the link in the description below. Keep your eyes peeled for plenty more content and exclusives here on The Inside Track.